Good day to you all. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our afternoon update on what is now Tropical Storm Arthur here in the northwestern Gulf Coast. PTC-1 has officially been designated Tropical Storm Arthur after recon surveyed the storm several hours ago and found tropical storm winds. So we now officially have our first named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season here, Arthur, which once again is just off the Gulf Coast. And looking at the satellite, it is definitely not a very pretty storm right now. Very sheared, very strong shear coming from the west, roughly 25 to 30 knots. And because of that, the low-level center with Arthur is very, very visible. You could actually see it right now near the Texas coast here. In fact, judging by the satellite right now, you could honestly argue that maybe this is already somewhat inland already. But we have convective activity well off to the east here. All of that is going to stream into western Louisiana and eastern Texas, and that's going to help fuel the ginormous flood threat that is going to be a big issue for especially Louisiana and Mississippi and the central Gulf Coast throughout the remainder of the week. But all of that being said, we do have our first named storm here in the Atlantic as of the 11 a.m. advisory Eastern Time, or 11:30 a.m. advisory Central Time. They actually just not long ago updated the stats here for Arthur, and so they extended a tropical storm warning, which I will go over in a little bit. But right now, maximum sustained winds with Arthur at 45 miles per hour, minimum central pressure at 999 millibars, and it is moving northeast at 9 miles per hour. And the latest advisory here, tropical storm warning extended southward, life-threatening flash flooding or flooding expected across portions of the southeastern United States. And let's go over what those new warnings are looking like right now. Before, we had a tropical storm watch that was in effect for the Texas coastline from Sargent, Texas, but now it looks like that they have officially updated the tropical storm warning now for pretty much the entirety of the warning area that they had before, from Sargent, Texas, all the way to Morgan City, Louisiana. And I think it absolutely does make sense, and I do believe it is warranted, especially now that we are talking about Tropical Storm Arthur here. But there actually have been some pretty interesting observations by buoys and by weather stations at or near the coast, especially near Galveston, that have come out in the last few hours. Some weather stations suggesting potentially 60 to 70 mile per hour winds being recorded in some areas, with gusts even higher. And obviously there is a discussion about whether or not those buoys are actually, near the surface or are several hundred feet up in the air and measuring stronger winds aloft that are not necessarily at the surface. But regardless, there are definitely tropical storm force winds present, and that definitely warrants here a tropical storm warning to be in effect for the coastline. And you could see that highlighted here on the actual graphic from the National Hurricane Center. Tropical Storm Arthur, officially the first advisory of it as a tropical storm, located right near the coastline here. So this is probably going to cross the coastline in just a matter of about an hour or two now. And well, to be honest though, probably for at least the remainder of the day. Even as it moves inland, it's still going to be very close to the coastline. Probably going to go over the Galveston Bay and over the Houston metro area, and then eventually make its way to the northeast here and probably become a depression by tonight. And you can see the wind field with Arthur as well, actually quite decently expansive, and it's especially expansive off to the east here, which is expected given that, as you can see by the wind shear, most of the shower and thunderstorm activity is sheared off to the east and really, honestly, well off to the east. So it makes sense that most of the strongest winds here are going to be to the east of the center, and that's going to continue to be the case here for the next few hours as this moves onshore. Here's a radar shot of how things are looking like right now. Some heavy rain streaming into Texas and Houston right now, although that has kind of died down and kind of receded back over the Gulf a little bit, but we're still getting those reports of gusty winds, especially near Galveston right now. And in fact, when recon was in the system earlier, I mean, I believe there's another recon plane headed towards Arthur right now, but this was a recon flight that went in and just recently left Arthur about an hour or two ago. But earlier this morning, when they were on their way towards the system, they did actually find on the eastern flank here flight level winds, meaning winds at the 850 millibar level, so somewhat up in the atmosphere, but not far from the surface. But typically, flight level winds are usually about 10 or so knots higher than what the winds are in reality from the surface. And flight level winds were actually found to be at least 50 knots, according to the recon pass when it went through earlier. So I guess if you want to reduce that to what the winds will most likely be at the surface, you could say that does support 40-knot winds at the surface, which is obviously what the National Hurricane Center went here for their latest advisory update, with the winds at 45 miles per hour. And interestingly enough, a pressure down at 999 millibars. I'm kind of not sure where they got that, though, since the dropsonde, I'm not sure if it was a dropsonde, but a vortex data message that the recon released found a pressure of 1,004 millibars. But nonetheless, when all is said and done here, we do have our first named storm of the season. Here's the interesting part, though. This is a buoy, I believe, probably more than likely not far from Galveston, or maybe this is near Galveston. And these are the winds at 10 meters. And you can see the buoy here over the last several hours, really seeing the winds increase. And the wind speed, this is in knots, so far has actually been above 40 knots. In fact, probably at or above 45 knots here, right near the Texas coastline. So definitely some pretty decently strong winds associated with Arthur here. And clearly some of those winds are being felt at the coastline. And again, obviously, especially if you are to the east of the center here along the eastern Texas coastline into Louisiana, you are going to experience strong gusty winds throughout the day here as Arthur moves inland. And especially as we get some of these rain bands here to move into the coast, as those rain bands push through, obviously some of those bands are going to have some of those gusty winds, probably to tropical storm force, and maybe even higher. Maybe some areas might see winds 45, maybe even 50, and like some of the weather stations are reporting at those offshore buoys, maybe some areas seeing 60 mile per hour gusts. But the biggest threat with Arthur, and I want to continue to talk about this as much as I possibly can, and I really want you to know that this is the biggest threat here, is not the wind. Yes, the wind will be gusty, especially if you are at the coast as Arthur makes its way onshore throughout the day today, but the rainfall is arguably going to be a much bigger issue because it is more than likely going to impact much more people, as we are going to see rainfall totals not only high at the coast, but especially here over the next few days across the Gulf Coast and across the Southeast. And I've talked about this before. Many areas potentially going to see rainfall up to half a foot and potentially up to a foot, especially in Louisiana, Mississippi, and even into Alabama here. This is going to cause a lot of flooding issues. And going back to the Weather Prediction Center, for the next 3 days, they have a moderate risk for flash flooding, stretching all the way from the Louisiana coastline through the central Gulf Coast into Alabama and even into parts of Georgia, and a general heightened flash flood risk throughout much of the Southeast and even extending into the Mid-South. So widespread portions of the country over the next several days going to be dealing with flash flooding, which is a huge threat. I mean, flash flooding is not something to take lightly. It can cause it is going to be a disturbance in your life, and it can sometimes lead to very serious and dangerous situations that are life-threatening and sometimes fatal. So do not take the flash flood risk lightly over the next few days here, and that's going to be the biggest issue with Arthur. Not the wind. The wind is going to be something that we will mainly see at the coastline, but especially in terms of what is going to have a much larger impact over a much greater size of the population, it's going to be the flooding, and that's something we will be continuing to monitor here over the next several days as Arthur moves ashore over Texas later today. With that being said, though, I'm going to wrap it up for today's discussion on Arthur. We're going to continue to have updates throughout the day here as Arthur moves inland, and obviously we're going to continue to have updates over the next few days as the remnants will rain themselves out over the southeast. So lots to watch here in the tropics. Hope you keep it tuned, and don't worry, I will definitely keep you covered on what is going to happen here over the next few days. And if you also want more updates, especially much more down to the minute, make sure to follow me on Twitter as well at Danilo Evangelista. I post, retweet, and do all kinds of things on Twitter much more often than I do on YouTube. I mean, I still post updates on YouTube throughout the day, but if you want especially down to the minute updates, follow me on Twitter as well, once again, at Danilo Evangelista. That's going to wrap it up for now, though. Stay safe. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and especially stay safe and stay indoors, and make sure to keep an eye out on conditions if you are down south along the Gulf Coast and across the southeast here, especially over the next several days. And I'll make sure to talk to you guys again very soon.